we have an attempt by Britain and others to yet again try to save the situation by blaming the ongoing mass murder of the Palestinians on simply Netanyahu plus his coalition partners, particularly Ben Gvir and Smotrich, who get mentioned a lot by establishment circles in the US and in Britain as being the guys who they're going to get tough with, who they're going to impose sanctions on. And Britain has imposed sanctions on Smotrich and Ben Gvir, or to give him his proper title, Kurdish Peter Griffin. If you see what I mean. But look at the photo. That is Kurdish Peter Griffin, on the rampage in occupied Palestine.
And you've forgotten Yoav Gallant as well, who seems to get quite a lot of criticism. But I just think it's that we've discussed it. We've discussed this on our past shows. But there has been slowly but surely the emergence of an anti-Netanyahu narrative in the Western media and amongst Western politicians over the past month. It's become particularly pronounced, surely not coincidentally related to Trump spurning Israel on his first official tour of West Asia, and his ambassador to Israel, Mike Huckabee, a hardcore Zionist who's made all sorts of disgusting proclamations about how Jewish people have a right to Palestinians' land, and the right to seize it via force if necessary. Has made a number of stinging comments about how the US doesn't need Israel's permission to sign deals. That followed the Trump's administration's capitulation to the mighty Ansar Allah in Yemen, and the toing and froing over the Iran nuclear deal continues, again with the Israelis frozen out. And I think that we've had a number of comments from European leaders that would have been unthinkable 6 months ago, condemning the atrocities against the Palestinians in Gaza and also the West Bank. The Spain's been all in on this, that we've seen even in countries like France and Britain. I mean, last year Macron was talking about how France was committed to Israel's security, and he was frequently advertising his positive communications via telephone with Netanyahu. Suddenly, Macron's all in on recognition of a Palestinian state, apparently. And also the in Britain, there has been, on top of the sanctioning, trade negotiations over a trade deal have been halted. There are areas of the 2030 roadmap for UK-Israeli relations which are under review. Of course, this does nothing to stop the genocide and offers little respite at all to the Palestinian people. But these moves are still kind of they would have been unthinkable not very long ago. Okay, and what's interesting is there has been an emergence as well of a key propaganda phrase, which is Netanyahu's war, and we're hearing this a lot from politicians and pundits and journalists. Netanyahu's war, Netanyahu's war, Netanyahu's war. Okay, so that's something to bear in mind. And you also should bear in mind that Starmer and Lammy, who, quote, per The Guardian, sounded angry at Israel at a late May parliamentary debate, during a late May parliamentary debate. They framed their criticisms of the 21st century Holocaust in Gaza not as a genocide, but as an aberrational and completely unprecedented upsurge of violence from Israel, which is damaging its good name and reputation. So this is despite the fact that polls of Israelis show that the overwhelming majority of Israelis are full-throatedly support the total erasure and or extermination of all Palestinians from their native lands, and their removal from Gaza and West Bank and wherever else they might be in their sick genocidal settler colony. So, but it does seem quite clear that Netanyahu is being built up as a fall guy to take the rap for this. And I think that actually the fact that this is being done at all, too little, too late, doesn't really cover it. And we've also had news that civil servants have, particularly within the Foreign Office, have been told to simply quit if they're upset by what's happening in Gaza. So there's not going to be any actual change in UK-Israel relations or the US-Israel relations, or their fundamental support for the apparatus and ideology of terror, ethnic cleansing, and repression that undergirds the Israeli state. But they're willing to make Netanyahu walk the plank.
The major problem for them, of course, is that they are trying to do an impossible thing here, which is they're trying to preserve the Israeli regime, whilst at the same time not suffer the domestic and international political consequences of spending almost 2 years backing the murderous rampage of this regime. Not just backing it politically, but facilitating it via the provision of weaponry, via the provision of diplomatic cover, and also via the method of trying to shut down any international judicial action against Israel. These are all things that they've done. Now that it's obvious that the Israeli regime cannot win this war, they could, just like the US couldn't beat Ansar Allah. They're trying to find a way to defuse the situation and preserve the regime. They think that they can do this by pinning everything on Netanyahu, Smotrich, Ben Gvir / Kurdish Peter Griffin, and get everything essentially squared off by pinning it all on them and then bringing back in some kind of more openly liberal form of Zionism headed by like Yair Lapid, or Benny Gantz or somebody like that. There's a problem with that, though, which is that ignores the chaotic dynamic within Israeli politics itself, which is that represented by the fact that the settler parties headed by Ben Gvir and Smotrich and others have been the only ones who've been consistently growing over the last few years, and that Netanyahu has been the only one in Israel who can put together remotely stable coalitions, because that's the trajectory, that has been the trajectory of Israeli politics for over 5 decades now, which is relentlessly driving towards ever more fascistic, wild extremes. And there is a narrative that's been sort of represented by New York Times perennial liberal hopeful Thomas Friedman, to say that Israel, it's not Israel and the Zionist project which is wrong. It's that this dastardly man Netanyahu has taken a good project and blown it up, basically, via his corruption and via his extremism. And if they can just get rid of Netanyahu and the settler parties, then they can restore order, and everything will be fine. The problem with that, though, is that ignores all of the internal Israeli political realities, and it also ignores the fact that the liberal, quote unquote, liberal part of Israeli society was just as much on board with the genocide as the openly reactionary part of it. There was no real difference between them when it came to that. Yes, they hate each other on a whole range of other issues, but on the question of the suppression of the Palestinian population, they're all absolutely unified. And also, the increasingly isolated nature of the Israeli regime can't be resolved by just swapping out Netanyahu. blaming it on here and trying to move on. Whoever comes in there next is going to act in roughly the same way. So London will be worse. You'll be worse. So this is London and Washington trying to nuance their way out of this because they can't find a military way out of it. We'll come later on to the developments with Iran, which is also, I think, prompting some of the crisis here. So this is a desperate attempt to get out of a situation that they helped create, well, almost over a century ago. And now we're approaching an end game, probably for the Israeli regime, and they've no idea what to do. Its backers, and hence the chaos.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that I mean, as joyous as it is to watch, Israeli society like eat itself from the inside. I mean, it's been openly reported that I mean there are prominent Israeli pundits who have predicted civil war. Because the country's in such a mess. Its economy is devastated. Its military is devastated. They're completely dependent on US financial support to keep their lights on. They've had mass population collapse. It carries on going. Entire sectors and industries in its economy no longer exist because people have left or they've been conscripted. Like they're in a they're backed into a corner where they think their only way out is yet more war, yet more expansion. But they don't have the muscle or the wealth or the people to do it. But another aspect, yes, as I very rudely interrupted you, Alex, I said, there is the prospect that even if they do get rid of Netanyahu and manage to somehow temporarily convince a very slim proportion of the Western population that this was all Netanyahu's fault, the possibility they'll get someone identical or worse is pretty much a certainty at this point. It must be remembered that Israeli society has reached such a point of supremacist sickness that in the lead up to Israel's criminal attack on Lebanon last year, where they got absolutely pummeled by Hezbollah, and Hezbollah didn't even use its full arsenal of weapons. I mean, Israel did kill a lot of civilians and destroy a lot of civilian infrastructure, but it was a military disaster for them. In the lead up to this, the Jerusalem Times published an interview on answering the burning question. It was like an explainer guide to the burning question of, are Jews biblically obligated to conquer Lebanon? And they consulted a rabbi from New York who cited biblical scripture stating that yes, that we are. In the lead up to, whether this is a coincidence or not, I don't know, but within days before the collapse of the Assad government, the Times of Israel, which is regarded as quite liberal and critical, maybe not so much as Haaretz, but is on the less kind of extreme side of Israeli opinion. They published an op-ed on, and it's unbelievable, but somehow unsurprising. They literally published an op-ed with the title "Jews Need Lebensraum." Or it was something similar. They were invoking the Nazi, heavily Nazi-tied German concept of living room, and therefore, Israel needed to annex lands from all of its neighbors, and you got to bear in mind that there was a chain of people that this story went up. Like, somebody wrote this, it was edited, and then a decision was made to publish it, and there was no sense of, ooh, this might not go down very well. Like, they're that screwed in the head now as a society that this is just mundane from their perspective.
Well, this is the quiet part out loud, though, isn't it? Because this was always there in the DNA of Zionism from the very earliest stages, and with people like Jabotinsky and others, where there was always an admiration for European fascism amongst them. And they wanted to find their own, basically Jewish exclusive version of fascism. And this is where a lot of these guys came from. And also, let us not forget, the open collaboration with the Third Reich that went on between the Zionists and the Nazis for quite some time. And so they've always had this like admiration for fascism of the most violent and extreme variety, because that's exactly the tactics that they need to apply to cleanse the areas that they wish to occupy, which is the same tactics of the Einsatzgruppen in the in the Nazi failed Nazi attempts to conquer the east of Europe and the Soviet Union. So the strongly fascistic aspect has always been there, as it is in every settler colonial project, whether it is white South apartheid era South Africa, French Algeria, British Rhodesia, etc. The fascistic element is always there, because that's essentially who are the most reliable fighters for the settler colonial project. It's going to be organized forms of fascism, which you do find in Israel quite a lot, in fact. And this idea that Jews as a religion are natural anti-fascists is erroneous, as saying that there's any such thing as a natural anti-fascist. There's always going to be fascistic elements in every nationality and religious group. Many of Mussolini's early supporters or a sizable number of Mussolini's early supporters prior to the anti-Semitic turn that Italian fascism took were Jewish business owners in the north of Italy, because Mussolini's fascists didn't discriminate at that time. So there's no such thing as like any kind of natural anti-fascism. Even the slaughter of Jews by the Hitlerites didn't put off the Zionists' admiration, the Zionists and their admiration for the Third Reich. And it must also be said that there is a significant number of Ukrainian Israelis who have fought, of course, under the banner of Bandera. Again, not put off by the history and the legacy of Banderism, because, hey, it's not them that got shoved into a ditch and shot, is it? You know, why would they care? Why would people care?
You also had like the visit of Azov to the Wailing Wall. Like this has been like forgotten now, but there were like Azov fighters who who paid a formal visit to Israel. I mean, yeah, it's really quite extraordinary, and I mean, I just think just to round this out, yeah, that I mean, obviously this strategy is going to fail. I do think that I wouldn't put it past and we'll get into this in due course. I wouldn't put it past some desperate last-ditch bid to by the Netanyahu government to try and stoke a wider regional war, probably with British encouragement and assistance. I wouldn't put it past him, because he is desperate to cling on to power. He knows he's going to jail the second that he's out of office due to industrial scale corruption throughout his very lengthy political career. They remain a cornered animal is potentially dangerous. And they have shown a willingness to. They have shown a willingness to. I mean, Jesus Christ! Like the raiding that flotilla, which had European lawmakers, officials, and also the very prominent Greta Thunberg on it. They had zero consideration for any negative PR emerging from that. They know that they can act with total impunity now.